Good morning, everybody, or afternoon or evening, depending on where you're joining us from. And welcome to our webinar on how to transform your recruiting culture from a reactive one to a proactive, all-star, passive talent-focused one. My name's Leela Srinivasan, and I'm the Group Marketing Manager for LinkedIn Talent Solutions. And I'm really excited to have Mike Gannier from Johnson Controls with us. I'll introduce Mike in just a second. Before I do, you'll see on the screen there the hashtag passive talent. Although we've decided to keep this webinar to 30 minutes today just to help you get on with your lives and get the information that you need, we would love to make it as interactive as possible. So please do use that hashtag to tweet your questions, comments, observations, to say hi from your part of the world, whatever takes your fancy. Now, let me introduce Mike Gannier. Mike is the strategic sourcing leader at Johnson Controls. That means that he runs the team that is responsible for delivering passive talent to their organization. He's also responsible for running employer brand promotion and talent attraction via social channels like LinkedIn. Mike's sourcing team extends to across Asia Pacific to Australia, China, Singapore, and India, I think. So he's very well versed in recruiting passive talent throughout the region. Welcome, Mike.
Thanks, Leila. Happy to be here.
Absolutely, great. So, Mike, before we plunge into the content and talk about how to make the switch to a more proactive recruiting culture, let's talk about why people might want to make that switch. What has it meant to Johnson Controls to switch from that more reactive mode?
Yeah, for us, it's been a couple of really big things. I think one, when we're reactive and only waiting for active candidates to apply to our advertisements and job postings, we start the search over from the very beginning every time, and the only time that we actually learn anything new about candidates comes after we've actually already started the search. So I think for us, the two biggest metrics, I guess, is one, it helps reduce our time to fill, since we already have relationships with existing candidates for that kind of role, have a pipeline that we've built or whatever the case. And second is just in quality of hire, that we're actually engaging the entire talent pool or the skill pool for a particular skill with active and passive candidates. So instead of just a portion, we have a much bigger piece of the pie. So the time to fill and the quality of hire, the two big pieces that made the most sense for us.
Yeah, and obviously quality of hire being so important, probably the most important metric to recruiters globally, certainly from our surveys. It's no surprise that from the research that we've done, we see 60% of recruiting leaders globally saying that their teams now focus on recruiting passive talent. But it's not always easy. It takes a completely different mindset, skills, and approach to do that successfully. And that's what today's call is all about. We wanted to provide some tips on and a plan really for thinking about how to get your organization to make that switch from a more reactive mindset. So we're going to walk you through that three-step recruiting culture makeover, as we call it, building the business case being step number one. And Mike's going to help us by sharing, in his words, how this has happened at Johnson Controls. So first off, when it comes to building the business case, we know that business leaders tend to love data and cold hard facts, and we also know that most people don't get into talent acquisition because they love data. It's really all about the people, of course. But I would say that now is a really good time in your career to get very comfortable with using data to make your case. So to share a couple of examples of how our clients of ours have used data to make the case for that switch to a more proactive, passive talent-driven culture. First off, some of them have taken the viewpoint of looking into the marketplace and understanding how their current efforts help them or don't help them get the talent that they need. So one way of framing it might be to look at where you have shortages within your organization and think about the business impact that is causing. So for instance, if you're not hiring engineers enough, that translates to X number of product launches delayed due to talent shortage. Same thing if you're not hiring sales folks enough, that translates to lost productivity. And so you can contrast that by looking at networks like LinkedIn and others to take a temperature and understand what pools of talent are out there today. And by juxtaposing those two numbers, showing that there's a shortage of candidates coming in, but the candidates are out there to be found, you can really make an effective case with leadership. The second approach that I wanted to share that's been successful, and I'm going to highlight Red Hat here, who today I think are one of the most forward-thinking recruiting cultures out there, but it hasn't always been the case. And if you go back a few years, they were in reactive mode themselves. And one way out of that for them was to actually audit their recent hires. And when they did that, when they looked at the last 100 or so folks that they brought into the organization, they found that 95% of their U.S. hires, UK hires in certain other markets, and 75% of their overall international hires already have profiles on LinkedIn. And bear in mind, this is going back a few years when our network was much smaller. And so they were able to use those facts to convince their HR leadership and their executives that they themselves, if equipped with the right tools, would be able to easily find the talent that they needed. So those are just two examples that I've heard from clients. Mike, what's been your experience of using cold hard facts to try and get buy-in on this new way of doing things?
Cold and hard is right. I don't know how often sometimes they're not as welcome, but it certainly helps make the case. So for us is a mix of internal and external data. So the external data is the market, identifying how many people are available in the market or having some idea of market information. So on the slide that's on the screen is a presentation that was done, a survey that's done between Lou Adler and the Adler Group and LinkedIn in 2011. This is so ideal for us because it helps identify the fact that when we post a job, we're really reaching less than 20% or less than a fifth of all of the potential talent that is available. That other 80% is just not looking for jobs; they're just not actively searching. And so, if we can engage both the passive and the active market at the same point, we're really taking a step forward. So we focus on our actives. We're limiting ourselves to a very small pool. And part of the thing is that I don't need every person in the skill pool, but I want to choose the best of the qualified and not the only one qualified out of the pool of applicants. So those two pieces together, I believe. So the external data and then internal for us is particularly the mix of source of hires. We have quite a bit of referrals, and I think that a pretty standard industry trend is that the majority or the biggest one source of hires from referrals, and so let's leverage those relationships and engage passive candidates through those relationships as well.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense, definitely. So the second part of building a business case, or another lever that we thought you could pull, would be to actually highlight competitors who are succeeding when it comes to recruiting passive talent. And by competitors, I don't necessarily just mean firms in your industry. Really, if they compete for talent in your area, it doesn't matter what industry the company is in, you can consider them a talent competitor. And there's no shame in using that peer pressure to get buy-in at your organization. On screen there, you see a selection of logos from case studies that we happen to have on our website, and you also see the link there at the bottom where you can explore those at your leisure. But you'll see more and more in the news, whether it's industry press or even the mainstream press, there being more and more stories about how companies are making this shift to a more proactive stance. Another thing that you can do is look at what your company is really spending on getting the right talent in the door. And I say really spending because chances are, especially at larger organizations, that the business units are paying for third-party search, and the overall number of the spend across the organization isn't necessarily being aggregated anywhere. It can be a real eye-opener to business leaders if you do the digging and find out exactly what that number is. And it presents a clear opportunity for you to bargain your way into repurposing some of that spend so that even if it's on a trial basis, you can explore recruiting passive talent yourself. Now, Mike, I know that you certainly have had some success when looking at the dollar impact of a sourcing team.
Yeah, and this is for sure. This is a big one for us, and I think that one thing I want to make sure to point out is that we like we've talked about several times. It's like we haven't always known where all of the money is being spent. So a business could spend the money as like they would be spending it for an attorney or other business services, or they could spend it as an employment service. And so it's not like we can just easily pull a report to see where the spend is happening. So that was a big concern. But the biggest point for us is identify what the average fee was. And so we knew that our average agency fee was $23,000. And then our average sourcer salary, our recruiter salary, is going to be $50,000 to $75,000 or so on average. And so our idea was that if we know that our average fee is $23,000, average salary is $50,000 to $75,000, that if a sourcer recruiter filled only 3 jobs in a year, that would well cover their salary, and any of the rest of the hires that they had would be just an addition or a benefit or bonus to it. And so that was a significant add or making the case for adding sourcers and certainly more talent to the team to be able to reduce the fees and take care of some of those. So our average sourcer fills about 22 positions a year, and at a minimum we have 10. And I mean, we have some recruiters. We had one recruiter last year that filled 9 positions in addition to their full life cycle just from sourcing. So that was a significant thing for our business.
Sounds like they're definitely paying their way there, Mike. So there's a question on Twitter from Glenn, which is, are we fooling ourselves with these economies? And do you find that you have to offer passive candidates a bigger package compared to active candidates? What's been your experience there?
That's a great question. There's a lot of research that goes into this. I think it's kind of a loaded question. I guess it depends on where it comes from. There's quite a bit of data that says that if you have a better or stronger employer brand, that you end up having to pay less in a fee to bring someone over from another organization. Certainly, somebody who's not working, it would take a lower salary. It's a generalization, but I think overall, is to take a lower salary than somebody who's working currently and receiving a paycheck would be less likely to move laterally, especially depending on how scarce the talent is. So there's several different factors that go in, but my bigger point, I guess, would be that if a passive candidate, the research suggests it is a higher quality, so they'll do better work, and the retention rate will be much higher. In fact, the retention rate was 25% better than active candidates. And so I think that easily pays for the gaps in salary when you have a higher quality and are able to keep that talent longer.
Very interesting. So I think net it sounds like it's a win. Good question though from Glenn. So you've built your business case with the facts. Now the next thing to do is to you've got the buy-in to go ahead and proceed with building out a passive talent strategy and trying to source talent directly. But it's, as we said, it's not as easy as just flicking a switch and making it happen. You really have to invest in your people as the second step to help them get up to speed on how to approach passive talent, how to work with them, how to have that conversation. So in terms of how you might tackle that, you can certainly start by training them all at the outset across all of the skills. A more manageable way to go about it might be to give them an overview, but then to focus on one actionable skill per month or whatever the time frame is to give them a chance to keep working on their skills and build them up. Some sample skills that we've seen clients train their teams on quite successfully as they build up that passive talent expertise would be some very basic things like writing a killer email so that you are more likely to get the response that you're looking for. Leveraging data to understand the talent pools that are available to you and to communicate with the business. How to give a great elevator pitch so that a passive candidate is inclined to say, sure, yeah, I'll have that next conversation with you. And then social media training at whatever level your organization happens to need it. Because one of the tricks of passive talent recruiting is as soon as you send that email or that email, the very first thing that a candidate will probably do is click on the sender's profile to find out more about the organization and the individual that they're dealing with. And so that's where it really pays to have a robust LinkedIn profile, for instance, so that they like what they see, and again, they're compelled to continue that conversation. Additionally, we suggest that you carve out some time to work on passive talent because it's not necessarily something that can happen overnight, and especially if your team is used to being more reactive and posting jobs and just waiting for candidates to show up, they need to get accustomed to the idea of actually proactively going out there and searching for that talent themselves. So we've heard of clients even going as far as to block 30 minutes a day on their team's calendars, and that's the designated minimum sourcing time so that their team can really just get used to the process and understanding how to go out there and find the talent that they're looking for. Now, Mike, I know that you've spent some time very successfully helping your team get up to speed. Can you share some of the things that you've done successfully here to really get them off to the right start?
Yeah, this is one of the things I love the most because I love development. I love helping people get the idea. And so I think the biggest thing for us, we certainly did training and have lunch and learn sessions or regular training sessions and things. The thing that's helped the most is helping the recruiters to habitualize or to use the tool on a regular basis and to make passive recruiting part of their regular sourcing activity or search activity. So for us, it's a quick win, and so we need to help somebody win quickly to get something new early on in their search. win, get a hire, get some candidates in, have some great conversations so that they see the value in it and continue to have some, continue to make it a part. So one example, we had a recruiter who was one of our worst in sourcing, and she's really sweet, but she's one of our worst as far as the sourcing tools go and searching for passive talent and generating relationships. And it was just that she wasn't using it poorly. She just wasn't using the tools and wasn't spending any time doing so. We set some time with her, and a couple of times in 1 week, and we sent out in about a half an hour in the morning. We put together a search strategy, searched for some people, created an in-mail, and sent it out. And she had 7 responses that day, and that was enough to get her to come back to do it again the next morning. And it became one of the things. Over 3 months, she continued to grow from one of our least users of the tools to one of our best, and it was like a super user in our internal language. And she was one of the best and was one of the best advocates. And so it's a significant change just because it was something that was done on a regular basis. And so I think that's been the biggest piece, just make it a regular part of your day.
That's fantastic. I'm sure she must have been thrilled with with those 7 responses, huh?
Yeah, that was it was like opening up a new gift. So.
Yep, sourcing is a gift. There you hear it. So another tip on this in this department in terms of investing in your people, and this is one where I don't think that all of our clients do this, but certainly we've heard of some successes in using some hard incentives to help recruiters understand the opportunity in direct sourcing. And the story I'll share is from a client called Rapid7. Now, they're a small technology company based in the northeast of the United States. They had about 150 people at the company when Ed Nathanson joined them as their Director of Talent Acquisition. And he walked into a situation where they were absolutely the most reactive recruiting department you can imagine. They were order takers. The business would come to them and say, I want X position and Y position by Friday, please. And there was no strategic approach. They really weren't in control of the situation. And Ed changed all of that. There are a number of different levers that he pulled, including starting to measure more effectively and manage the business by the metrics, which we'll talk about in a second. But one of the more interesting things that he did was he actually incentivized his team so that every hire they made, they received a bonus, sales style, so long as that hire stayed for a certain amount of time. And that bonus doubled when the hire was of a certain level, and it quadrupled when the hire was made at the highest level. So net, some of Ed's recruiters ended up actually earning more than Ed, the manager, and he was perfectly fine with that because basically his people were being incentivized to basically perform the right behaviors, and the results from a recruiting standpoint were phenomenal. The quality of talent rose at the organization. The time to hire was decreased actually because the team were really focused on bringing in the right people, and as a result, they've won awards for their recruiting and also their culture at their organization. The last thing in investing in your people is recruitment does all of this, of course, in partnership with hiring managers. And, I can say this as a hiring manager. Hiring managers aren't always the most understanding when it comes to the process, and they won't necessarily understand the difference between passive and active talent off the bat. And so that's an opportunity for you to really coach them and help them understand the differences and how they might behave differently as a result. So, Mike, how have you dealt with that at Johnson Controls?
That's good. Our VP of Talent always says to us that fear is based in uncertainty, and so if we can help make things more certain, it helps remove the fear, or at least reduce the fear. So I think that one of the reasons that a hiring manager may push against a passive candidate or a candidate that they would have to sell to in order to get interested is just because they don't understand how to manage that candidate. And so we created a one-page passive talent tips sheet that just has some frequently asked questions. There's some little boxes for them to enter in, like what their pitch is to a candidate. So it gives some ideas of how they can structure a conversation, what kind of things might a passive candidate be interested in hearing from them. And then there's certainly some differences between an active and a passive candidate. An active candidate is one that has approached us, and while we need to sell that candidate, it may be lighter than somebody that we've reached out to and started to generate some interest. So it may require some selling on their part, and they may not have ever done that before. And so some of the things that's also helped, aside from that sheet, is on a kickoff call talking about all the selling points, and we go through that tip sheet. But then when we ask them about what competitors they would like us to target, what organizations do they respect the talent in that may be also a fit for this search, is often they haven't heard that before, and so that makes a big difference in credibility for our team, that we have the ability to go and identify talent based on some of their desires. And so that's a big piece for us, and that's helped win some credibility with them, and win some of the opportunity to influence them in how they approach talent. And then if we have any candidate or any hiring managers that are really pushing back hard, often we'll just buy a Starbucks card and have the hiring managers go and meet a candidate for coffee, and in a very relaxed setting, so it's not much like an interview. We tell them, don't bring any notebooks and things along. Just sit and have a conversation with the candidate. Talk about the job, talk about the company, and win with that candidate. And so leave positive, so that when we follow up with that candidate, had a positive interaction, they're then more likely willing to then come in for a formal interview after they've had some decent conversation. So just some really simple things that just help to help understand, I guess, and remove some of the fear or the uncertainty they have about what a passive candidate is and how that's different from an active candidate.
Fantastic. Going back to just some of the skills and investing in your people, question came in from Renee Vanderberg, which I think is an important one, which is it more effective to search for specific skills instead of a broad spectrum of skills when you're going for passive candidates? What's the search strategy?
I always will lean to a very wide skill set, so I would say very light in keywords, and filter down more specifically on some of the easy things like education and location and things like that, work history, companies and that. Because I think that when we're searching for people, the more keyword heavy we are, the more we, what I call keyword discriminate. So it's not racial discrimination or gender discrimination, it's keyword discrimination. So I'll hold it against somebody for not having the right keywords in the search. And so because I've entered in so many keywords, somebody doesn't have all of those keywords in the search won't show up in my results. So I'd much rather, I'd lean towards less keywords and more of the filters and affinities like education, location, companies, titles, and things like that, and playing with those things to get the right results. But I think it really depends. I mean, sometimes there's just a non-negotiable for you. So I think that we do both, but I say I always lean to light keywords.
Yeah, it's interesting. We did a webinar last month with Glenn Cathey, who's also known as Boolean Black Belt. He's one of the most respected. You know Glenn fairly well, probably, Mike, but he's one of the most respected folks in the industry in terms of thinking about search. And he was talking about this very thing last month on a webinar that we did, just around every term that you enter, you discriminate against. Something as simple as have they filled out their profile. I mean, they may have all of these skills, but if you were searching specifically just for that one skill and they happen not to have included it in your profile, then you could be excluding some perfectly qualified people. So what we'll do is we'll tweet out a link to that webinar from last month, because I think there's some really good learnings in there for folks on the call.
Yeah, excellent.
All right, so on to step 3, and that's to, your job is not done when you get the go-ahead to do this and then get your people up and running and being successful. You then need to monitor and communicate your progress back to the organization. So first off, we think it's really important to praise team triumphs. So Mike shared the story earlier about one of his recruiters who was struggling and then got 7 responses in a single day. It's celebrating those types of wins that goes a long way with the team to reinforcing the value of what they're doing and giving them confidence in what they're doing. In particular, we would suggest you highlight the first rock star hire that you make who is passive in real time, so that people really tie that excitement or relief if it's a hard rec to fill to the notion of going after passive talent. And then additionally, just as we talked about data for building the business case, it's really important also to use numbers to maintain the business case and to share back with the organization the power of what you're doing. And Mike, I know that you looked at all sorts of things when measuring the effectiveness of what you were doing. Our adage at LinkedIn, and this actually started with our insights team, but I think our talent acquisition team believes it as well, is that if you don't measure it, you cannot manage it. So that's their viewpoint. Mike, what sorts of things have you focused on for measurement?
Oh, boy, this is a huge one for us. This is a big culture change. When I started in the role, the only thing we really held as any value is how many hires each one of our sourcers got. And it just seemed that, like, I can't control the hire. I'm not the one making the hiring decision, and neither are the sourcing or the recruiters that are on my team. And so what we did is we got into a room and had everybody go. We wrote our entire process out and wrote down every possible thing that could be managed, something that could be measured in the process. Everything we could think of. I'm sure there were more. And it's really frustrating to see all those. And we decided, like, what's important. And in order to do that, we had to go back to what our goal was. And so to us, it's no longer about that hire. Now, we certainly, in the end, the hire is the most important piece. We'll get the hires. What we decided to focus on is where we have the biggest effect, and that's in the candidate pool. And so what we resolved or decided on is that the number of qualified candidates submitted per rec or per pipeline is the biggest measurement. Because if we have more qualified people in the pool, we're going to end up hiring the best qualified or the most qualified of all of the qualified instead of the only qualified of all of the applicants. And so that was a big change for us. It just helped us get closer to our goals. We started submitting 3 times as many candidates as we had before. Once we started on this, and it's like it helped us build our pools, and then certainly the credibility. The recruiters are happier, hiring managers are happier when we focus on the right things.
That's phenomenal. Yeah, I mean, to your point, you can measure everything, and in some ways, you probably want to at least have access to metrics, because knowing executives, they'll probably come up with some reason that they want those. But I think it really does help to be focused on managing your business to the things that you know really matter. And in your case, I think you nailed it right there on screen. All right, so the last tip here that we have, and we'd love to hear from some more questions from the audience as well, is not to be shy. So in closing, I would say that you can think of this opportunity, this chance to move your recruiting culture from reactive to proactive as your chance to really fly the flag and be a progressive recruiting leader. And don't be shy about not only sharing your successes within HR, but also across the business. And that's the path that we've seen many a company take toward becoming a truly strategic talent advisor for their organization. So with that, all of the tips that we share today are included within a tip sheet, which you can download whenever you like at the link that's on screen. And I'd like to open it up for some more questions as we have them. And one question as we're just watching the stream come in is just that Mike, as I said at the beginning, you have sources across parts of Asia Pacific. What, if anything, is different about what you do in different parts of Asia Pacific to what you do in the U.S.?
Yeah, that's really great. So I think one of the things is in North America, we've had a lot closer engagement with LinkedIn, and as LinkedIn continues to expand into other parts of the world, I think we do a little bit tighter training. And then the passive candidate engagement has been something that, for instance, in China, we have several sourcers that are in China, one in Singapore, one in Australia, and one in India. And when we engage with those folks to talk about how they're reaching out to passive candidates in their markets, there are certain instances where it almost seems taboo still that to reach out to somebody directly and not use a third-party agency. And so I think part of it is we, with our recruiting teams in Asia, is particularly focused on helping them feel comfortable in their approach to candidates. And I think there's some of the same hiring manager kind of training, how to sell, what things passive candidates are most interested in. They already know how to find them. It's the same way as searching through a database anywhere else. It's just the approach to a passive candidate is probably just a little bit more of a focus for us in Asia, and helping to understand the philosophy behind it than necessarily just the practice.
Got it. And then a question from Glenn, with slightly tongue-in-cheek, I think, but he says, I work abroad. My recruiting team uses their candidates in other countries. So in other words, sounds like he could be recruiting expats or, in that situation. How do you engage candidates when you can't simply pop into the local Starbucks to grab coffee with them? Is there anything that you do differently there?
Glenn, that's such a good question. So I think candidates everywhere. I mean, we're all humans. And all humans, they want to talk about themselves. I want to talk about myself, and anybody that's listening, I'm sure you like to talk about yourself. So if we get people, regardless of where they are, to open up about what they're good at, to help them understand some of the challenges we have, and get their perspective on how they might meet that challenge. I mean, people love to talk about those kind of things, and so I think regardless of where you are, if I start by engaging and focusing on the candidate or focusing on the individual, get them to talk about themselves and make everything about them, that this is a career for them or an opportunity potentially, and the only way I can do that is if you tell me about yourself and how this might fit in and the organization and all of those things. Make it about the candidate, and when we do that, I think anybody responds anywhere. And really quickly, we had an agency that was ready to engage, a retained agency for a country leader in India, and the HR head of Asia for one of our business units contacted our HR head in the United States or North America and said, here's the search. Could you look over this? And she's like, hey, wait, let's see what our sourcing team can do. And so we got in, and within 3 weeks, we were able to identify 8 candidates, and 5 of them were interviewed, and 1 of them was hired. And we were able to do that much more quickly and for far, far less than what the agency would have charged. We do use agencies. It's just we use agencies on purpose. And I thought, in this case, let's give it a shot. And in India, from Milwaukee, we found what seemed to be a purple squirrel candidate. Actually, found 8 of them in a short order. So I think that it can certainly happen overseas with no trouble.
I don't know if purple squirrels are renowned in Asia Pacific. That's what we call the impossible to find candidate. Maybe there's a purple kangaroo or a purple panda somewhere out there that we should be referring to instead. All right, we're almost at time. I wanted to share some resources, and we still have time for one more question after that, but I wanted to share some resources with the audience today. By the way, I know there have been a couple of audio issues for some of our audience. We will be sending out a recording for this webinar afterwards, so you can replay any parts that you may have missed. But the first 4 tips that you see on screen are links that we referenced during the presentation. And then the last 3 links there are things that I thought might be of help to anyone who's just starting to get going on passive talent recruiting. So first off, we will have additional webinars on this topic in future. Secondly, our blog, the Talent blog, we tend to cover best practices from industry leaders like Mike and his peers, and are always, passive talent is a topic that's very top of mind for us. So feel free to access that blog and subscribe so that you can stay up to date there. And then last but not least, on SlideShare, we're increasingly sharing best practices there as well. So that's a more visual opportunity for you to do some learning. Last but not least, would suggest that you follow us at Hire on LinkedIn for anything else that we can share with you on passive talent. So one last question, I think, before we hang up, Mike, which is just around how you've structured your team for success in order to knock it out of the park when it comes to recruiting passive talent.
So we've had several different iterations of our sourcing team and recruiting team, and I think one of the pieces is we do have the luxury of having a dedicated sourcing team. The sourcing team doesn't recruit on everything. They're focused particularly on certain pipelines that are important to the business, and I wish we could even manage all the pipelines that we could. But we have recruiters or sourcers that are dedicated to those pipelines and building candidates or building relationships with passive candidates. The rest of the recruiting team is expected to source on their job. So we have a sourcing recruiting team and then a sourcing team. And so we do work together to manage candidate searches and things. And, we have to work closely to help with sourcing strategies and make sure we're not stepping on each other. But it's expected of both the recruiting and sourcing teams, and it adds value overall. So I think that, small companies and large can focus on passive candidates regardless of having a dedicated team or not.
Fantastic. So don't let size stand in your way, I think, is Mike's closing message there. So thanks for everyone who joined us today for this call, and a big thanks to Mike Gunier for sharing his expertise with you. Really, as always, Mike learned a lot from you, and thanks so much.
Bye, everyone.
All right. Take care. Have a good day.